I just know that when I run across a very tough research question, often my first email is to Suzanne, and she often can find answers that elude me. Uh, and I knew she had a surpassing interest in her great great grandfather. I think I have the number of greats correct,
Correct.
Joshua Chatterson. And so I asked her if she would want to do a program on him, not just on him, but also kind of on the way life was in Three Oaks back in his day. And I'll let her describe what that day is, but it was 150 years ago or so. So with that, I'll turn it over to Suzanne, and as promised, I'll mute myself and just let me know when you want the first slide, Suzanne.
Okay, well, feel free, Nick, to chip in if I mess something up, because this has been a team effort here. Um, this has been exciting for me. When I was I think in high school, I took a sociology class and we were assigned to do a family tree and talk about what each of our ancestors did for a living. And I didn't know very much, and my dad called around and got some information. And Joshua Chatterson was my great great grandfather. I knew nothing about him at the time. With the advent of the internet, it's been a lot easier to do research. Here is a picture of him. He was born in 1843, December 1st, 1843, in Utica, New York. He was the fourth of six children born to Henry and Margaret Bortle Chatterson. I know very little about his parents, um, although his father died in October of 1847, so Joshua grew up really without a father. The map shows where Utica is. It's in Oneida County, and the family lived in New Baltimore, which was kind of a suburb of Utica in 1860. Um, from there, they came to Michigan, but I found a record that Joshua was apprenticed to a tin maker in Green Bay, Wisconsin for about 2 years from 1858 to 1860. I have not been able to find anything about that except this little tidbit in a newspaper article. I do know that Chattersons went to Wisconsin. I'm guessing he was related to some of them, but I have not solved that problem yet. In early At the time of the 1860 census, Joshua was back in Michigan, living in Bainbridge Township in Berrien County with his mother, who was listed as being a tailor, and they lived with his older sister, Julia Graham, and her family. Joshua was listed as a, 16-year-old farm laborer at the time. And his sister eventually moved back to Utica, but Joshua seems to have stayed in Michigan. Although it's unclear where he was between 1860 and 1861. He did, next slide, I guess. He enlisted in the 12th Wisconsin Infantry at Green Bay in October of 1861. I was in Madison, Wisconsin at one time, and I got to see the enlistment books at the Wisconsin Historical Society. I went through the whole section of the week that he enlisted, looking for names that might be a clue to why he enlisted there. I found nobody with a similar name or another family name. So how he ended up enlisting in Green Bay, he must have been back at the tinsmiths. But he then was sent to Camp Randall, which is the site of Camp Randall Stadium where the Wisconsin football team plays on the campus of the University of Wisconsin. That's where all the troops were brought in, and that's why Camp Randall Stadium is called Camp Randall Stadium. It was the site of the Civil War camp. He was assigned to Company H. Is this slide? Yeah, this is slide 6. These are just some pictures of the 12th Wisconsin, not necessarily his company. The unit left for Camp Fort Leavenworth, Kansas on January 11th, 1862. This would be slide 9. They arrived February 16, and then in April were sent to Fort Riley, Kansas. As you see on the lower left of this picture, it lists 3 of the soldiers who marched with Sherman to the sea. I like to tell all of my mostly Southern Civil War friends in Fairfax that my grandfather marched with Sherman to the sea when they're bragging about their Confederate soldiers. During service, the regiment moved on through Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi. They spent some time along the river in Vicksburg. They were at the Battle of Vicksburg. Then Alabama, Georgia, Sherman's March to the Sea, the Carolinas. After they romped through Georgia, they headed north, the Carolinas, Virginia, and ended up in Washington, D.C., where the unit participated in the grand review of the armies at the end of the war. Okay, next slide, I think. I don't have any writings. I found one thing that Joshua wrote, but this is this is it. It's the story of a brave soldier. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but he wrote this letter to a Wisconsin newspaper. It was picked up by several newspapers in Wisconsin, and he talks about how he's now a hardware dealer at Three Oaks, Michigan. And he talks about he's thinking about some of the things he did in the army. He wishes he had been more brave than some of the other soldiers. Some of them were sent out on a sortie, and he stayed behind with a wounded buddy. And this is the only thing I really have that he wrote. And I don't think I need to read it all. Do you, Nick? But he tells the story about his friend being killed instantly, and his captain, Captain Blakesley, after the war moved to Ironton in Sauk County, Wisconsin, and he became a legislative representative in Wisconsin. Okay, the next slide is a story he also told about. Let me just read this because it's short. How well I remember just after the Second Corinth fight, that would be Mississippi, our regiment was ordered back to Bolivar, Tennessee, and we were obliged to go foraging for the teams. We had orders not to kill any hogs or chickens or anything. Myself and 2 other soldiers were detailed to guard the train on a foraging expedition. We caught and killed a nice porker and cut out a ham, and Arnold rolled up a large bundle of straw for a bed, of course, and put the ham in the center, and then he rolled the whole thing up in his oilcloth. When we came into camp and were going to our company, we passed by Colonel Bryant's tent. He hollowed out, "See here, Arnold, what have you in that bundle?" "Straw, Colonel, for a bed," said he. The colonel added, "You take that around to my cook and have him cut off a piece of that straw for my supper. Fine straw, that." So that was Joshua's little story about his days in the 12th Wisconsin. And I think it shows that he had a bit of a sense of humor there. We call that the ham story. After the war, after he was let out of the war, I think it was August or September of 1865, he came back to Michigan, and I'm not really sure why. He ended up in Cass County, Michigan. He was working in the tin business in Dowagiac, and here he married Mary Amelia Spencer in 1866. In 1869, the Chatterson moved to Three Oaks in the spring of 1869. By 1870, he goes into business with Joseph Friedel. And my classmate, Judy Tusek, is related to the Friedels. They were in business from 1870 to 1897 in Three Oaks. And Nick found this great picture of Joseph Friedel, who was a German immigrant who came to Three Oaks in 1853 as a young boy. The Friedels came from Bavaria and were, I guess, helped found the Catholic Church in town. Here we have a receipt for the purchase of the property for a store. The property here, Chatterson and Friedel bought land to build their store. And we believe this is probably where the parking lot is between Frelick's and the old downtown drugstore. And they purchased it from, we think it's Joseph Wilson or Wilbon of Three Oaks for $700. And here's a map showing the hardware business. The 1872 listing of businessmen in Three Oaks, you'll see some familiar names there. Isaac Martin was a supervisor. We had a carriage manufacturer, two carriage manufacturers, Chamberlain and Churchill's dry goods store, Henry Chamberlain's general merchandise. O. Churchill, MD, ran a drugstore. We had a blacksmith, couple of grocery stores, a baker, a blacksmith, a lumber mill, sawmill, an attorney, just kind of every little business you'd expect to see in a small town. I don't know, Carolyn, where Alec Watson is. He was there by 1872, I believe. But you can see that on the map, it's kind of small, but you can see where some of the businesses were in town. And, you know, it's still very much the layout we have downtown today. Here is a picture of a street scene in Three Oaks. That's E.K. Warren standing there on the left of the photo in the nice looking suit. And you see the hardware store at the right of this first picture, or the hardware sign up above. The brick building, which was once Elferdink's furniture store, is still there. The Chamberlain, Warren, and Hatfield store is where the library is today. And the Elferdink's furniture store is now Tom Pauly's art gallery. And on the right, you just see a typical ad. Local businesses ran ads in the local newspapers practically every week. Sometimes they'd run the same ad over and over. But here it shows that Joshua was selling stoves, tinware, sashes, doors, blinds, all kinds of things, agricultural implements. North side of the railroad tracks, next door to something in Warren's. So that's a good street scene of downtown Three Oaks. The next slide is 3 different shots of the hardware sign, which was up above the store. The one on the left is a good picture of Joshua Chatterson's hardware store. I don't know why it doesn't say Chatterson and Friedel, unless this picture was around 1900 after Friedel left the business.
I think it was taken later. Yeah.
Okay. But you see the hardware sign from 3 different angles. Here it's still there after the Warrens built the big brick building on the corner. That was long gone by the time I was growing up. Here is an ad, let's see, where it says at the bottom, call at the wire sign, north side of the railroad track. I think it was probably the highest sign in town. And this little ad says, remember that he's the only hardware man in town. His sign is out, and if you miss him, you're to blame. Select a stove, and they do the rest. So again, Nick likes to point out that Joshua seems to have had a sense of humor. So we're learning a little bit about him from the way he did business. Okay, the next picture is another picture of the store. You see the sign up above it. And next door on the right is the Chicago store, which was another business. I did a little research on who ran the Chicago store. That name escapes me at the moment. But you see, people are sitting out there watching the things go by. And I guess it was busy. Here's another picture of Joshua. Chatterson and Friedel, hardware men, are well satisfied with their trade. They support a fast horse and a big sign. Joshua likes argument, either on hardware or politics, and Friedel wants to be a Granger. And again, this was just a little blurb we found in the paper. In December 1878, this article ran, Joshua Chatterson's horse came down the street on the fly with a buggy attached and no driver. He was caught before doing any damage. Joshua was careless in not hitching his steed. A few hours after, a double team came out of McCann's mill yard with the forward wheels of a wagon. They were stopped and no damage done. This was the exciting kind of pieces of news you found in the Three Oaks newspaper from time to time. And here's a second article from March of 1881. J. Chatterson thought of buying one more horse, thought he would drive the horse before buying. The horse traveled so fast that he ran through a board fence, breaking the boards flat. He didn't make room enough to get the carriage through. Consequence, carriage, driver, and horse came to a sudden whoa. Here is an ad where they shows that the company prided themselves on selling things for as cheaply as possible. Chatterson and Friedel would respectfully announce to the citizens of Three Oaks and vicinity that they are prepared to sell all kinds of hardware as cheap as the cheapest, and all goods are warranted. And this is a story that Nick particularly liked. Mr. Chatterson happened into McKee and Warren's just after they had made Mr. Wright a present of a jackknife. Josh, says Ed, you can't undersell us on cutlery. Yes, we can, said Joshua. We have facilities for buying which enable us to sell cheaper than any other house in town. Mr. Wright, what did you give for your knife? I didn't give anything, said Mr. Wright. It was a present. Joshua said nothing, but started for his store. Taking a knife from the case and 5 cents from the drawer, he presented them to Mr. Wright. McKee and Warren had to give up that Chatterson and Friedel must have unusual facilities for buying cutlery. So he undercut McKee and Warren by giving him the knife plus a nickel. Here's a picture of the town being modernized. I don't know if they were putting in a sewer or what, but this is probably in front of the hardware store. If you look behind the man on the left on the street, that's the Chatterson and Friedel hardware store. And you see a little wagon out there, a washing machine, and some other implements. We don't know who that is standing to the right or the left, but it's kind of a neat picture of Three Oaks being modernized. And here we have a story from the Three Oaks Independent. During the storm of Friday night, some miscreant entered the hardware store of Chatterson and Friedel by forcing a back window, drilled a hole in the safe, put in some powder, and blew the lock to pieces. And taking out the money box, carried it and a sledge they found in the store down to the railroad, a few rods, where they used the sledge to batter open the box, abstracting from about $100 in money, besides valuable papers such as notes, mortgages, etc. Next story, we find the thieves were caught. Prosecuting attorney Van Riper has got after the gang of safe blowers that have been operating in various parts of the state and northern Indiana with a sharp stick. He went to Galena on Monday for the examination of Winfield J. Kassler of Chicago, who was arrested on the 8th of May on the charge of blowing open George A. Blakesley's safe. I believe he was a Gillene businessman. Cashier Kassler waived examination on the charges and was immediately arrested for robbing Chatterson and Friedel's safe in Three Oaks. He was committed in default of $2,000 bail in each case. The evidence against him is pretty conclusive that he was intimately connected with both robberies. The other two members of the gang are known, and their early arrest is not among the improbabilities. It is thought they are the same parties who robbed the post office at this place a few weeks since. So who knew we had gangs of thieves running wild? Next, we're going to look a little bit at Joshua Chatterson's civic involvement. The Reveille was, I believe, the first paper in Three Oaks, and Joshua Chatterson was one of the trustees for Fred Warren's newspaper. Fred was the editor of the paper, and Joshua had actually invested in the newspaper. He was elected to the Common Council in 1876, along with William Chamberlain, James McKee, Charles Close, Samuel Hess. In 1896, he ran for state representative on the Democratic ticket. And here was a little kind of a letter to the editor of the Niles Daily Star. We know Mr. Chatterson well. He was in many a bloody fight during the rebellion, and he will have the courage to meet the foes of free silver in the coming battle of ballots. Unfortunately, he lost, but he did run. He also served as a justice of the peace, where he conducted marriages, and he even held a court trial, which is listed on the book. We found a couple of court trials, but much like Ed Dreyer was the justice of the peace, this was Carolyn's grandfather when we were growing up. Joshua Chatterson had an office above the hardware store, and he held court there. In the early 1880s, he was involved in the Greenback Party, which was an American political party with an anti-monopoly ideology, which was active from 1874 to 1879. The party's name referred to the non-gold-backed paper money commonly known as greenbacks. At this time, he attended nominating conventions along with other names you'll see: Jacob Donner, Charles Volman, George Carrier, William Bremer, Mischler, Breese, John Smee, Heckman, Chamberlain, and Ernest Bartlemeyer. Many of those names are familiar to many of you today, I think. In 1899, this is kind of interesting. He ran on the citizens ticket against E.K. Warren for president of the council. E.K. won by 140 to 82 votes. We believe the citizens ticket was against the no saloon ticket. E.K. Warren was paying off local businesses to not get liquor licenses. He didn't want to have liquor available to his workmen at the factory. And so he figured out what revenue the sale of liquor licenses could bring, and he paid the village that money. Those on the citizens ticket, I think, were not so anti-saloon, and they ran, but E.K. Warren prevailed. The interesting thing is that back in 1884, Joshua Chatterson was a delegate to the state convention of the Prohibition Party. So at one time he was pro-prohibition, but later in life he was anti-prohibition. Citizens Cannon Caucus. This was a call issued by representative businessmen in Three Oaks to set up a Citizens Cannon Caucus. They were interested in the welfare of Three Oaks, and this must have been after the cannon came to Three Oaks, and I guess they used that name. And he was active there along with Alec Watson, Dix Beeson, William Minster, again, a number of names: William Watson, George Perrin, T.E. Davidson, J.H. Holden, George Stevens, and this was in February of 1900.
Well, let me intercede here.
Please do.
The cannon was already in Three Oaks, but they hadn't had the big dedication ceremony. So my guess is the Cannon Caucus planned the big ceremony they held in June of 1900, where they dedicated it amid much pomp and ceremony and huge crowds.
That
So
makes sense. And we do know he was involved in that. Another thing that was big in Three Oaks for many, many years, probably 20, 30 years, was the Anti-Horse Thief Society. It was called the Lakeside Anti-Horse Thief Society. And I believe you did a program on the Anti-Horse Thief Society early on. There were ads in both the Three Oaks papers, the St. Joe and Benton Harbor papers listing all these people. I think you had to pay dues to belong to the Anti-Horse Thief Society. And if your horse got stolen, this group tried to find your horse. They would ride off and try do it. But I think it was more of, they had an annual picnic. I think it was not just a serious anti-horse thief society. I think it was a social group as well. But Joshua was involved in it for many years. He was also active in the County Sunday School Association, which E.K. Warren actually was, yeah, it was E.K. Warren, was very active in the World Sunday School Association, but Joshua was active in the county association, and you'll see there are people from all over the county, and E.K. Warren was the secretary. The Sunday School Association had conventions most years. That picture on the left is a picture of a window that still exists in the Methodist Church. After Joshua's death, around 1909, they renovated the Methodist church, or did they rebuild? They rebuilt the brick church, I guess. And his widow paid for that window to be installed in the church. At the bottom, it says, "In remembrance of Joshua Chatterson," by Mrs. Amanda Chatterson. He was also involved in the International Organization of Odd Fellows. Like the Masons, the Odd Fellows were a fraternal organization that has been in existence for centuries. Odd Fellows emphasize principles of friendship, love, and truth, which is their motto. Like the Masons, they're organized into lodges, which are the basic units of organization, and they have a strong tradition of charitable work and community service. This picture appeared in the local newspaper. That's Joshua highlighted in the left corner, but many other Three Oaks businessmen are in that photo. And I do have it ran in the paper with the names of all the people in the photo, and it must have been taken at the Odd Fellows Hall. And I'll tell a little story here. Several years ago, my mother got together with the people from the Sons of the Union Veterans, and Joshua had never had a Confederate veterans marker on his grave. So they installed one. And when they dug the hole to put the the Union, the GAR marker by his grave, they found this broken Oddfellows metal thing that must have been there in the grave. And I have it somewhere in my house. I packed it up and it's in a box somewhere. I haven't located it yet. But that's kind of a neat picture of local people involved in the Oddfellows. The next slide is about the GAR. That stands for the Grand Army of the Republic. And it was kind of like the American Legion for Civil War veterans. There were GAR posts all over the country. This particular article shows that Joshua served 1 year as the post commander. It lists some of the soldiers who were wounded in action during the war. And this little article was from 1896. The post was named the Charles Woodruff Post number 85. And they got together every year on Memorial Day out at the cemetery to honor the Civil War veterans. And I know some of you remember going out to the cemetery, riding the school bus out to the cemetery on Memorial Day, where the American Legion did ceremonies. It dates back to the 1800s, and the GAR started that. In September of 1877, Mr. and Mrs. Joshua Chatterson went to Madison, Wisconsin to attend the reunion of the 12th and 16th Wisconsin regiments. From there, they went on to Lake Superior and other points in the Upper Peninsula and via the lakes home. They were gone for a week. That's a pretty fast trip to go around the lake in those days, I think. Here is a listing of names and present addresses of some of the survivors of the 12th Wisconsin, and you'll see Company H there is Joshua Chatterson of Three Oaks in Berrien County, Berrean County, Michigan. In August of 1897, a great event was held in Three Oaks. Okay, on the left, you will see this. I'm going to read something in a couple minutes about that archway at the end. That was at the corner of Linden and South Elm Street. And these are people gathered up for the GAR encampment. Why it was called Camp Bradley, we have no idea. The only reference to this being Camp Bradley was in the newspaper shortly after the event. The event was held August 11th and 12th of 1897, and these are pictures of the GAR encampment. I believe this is the school grounds. In the article that I'm going to read some excerpts from, it said there were tents set up along Ash Street in front of the school. And so I think this is probably what's Carver Park today. And here are pictures of the soldiers marching in the parade, some of the soldiers after the event. It was really quite a big deal. And let me tell you a little bit. The Grand Army of the Republic was the largest of the Union veterans organizations, was the most powerful single issue political lobby of the late 19th century, securing massive pensions for veterans and helping to elect 5 post-war presidents from its own membership. Linking men through their experiences of the war, the GAR was among the first organized groups in American politics, supporting voting rights for Black veterans, promoting patriotic education, helping to make Memorial Day a national holiday, and lobbying Congress to establish regular veterans pensions. Its peak membership was in 1890. From an article in the paper after the event, it said that businesses and homes were decorated. Most beautiful was the arch across Elm Street at the corner of Linden. The structure was covered with canvas and illuminated at night with 120 incandescent lights. It was designed and constructed entirely by our citizens. The ornaments were designed after the GAR badge. 3,500 to 5,000 people attended the Thursday afternoon events. There was a bicycle parade in the evening featuring 75 wheels in line, decorated in bunting and carrying Chinese lanterns. 400 old soldiers marched behind them. That afternoon, there were baseball games between Three Oaks and Hartford, which were well attended. A dinner was served at the engine house. They had planned for 1,000 people and ran out of food, and they were embarrassed that they couldn't feed everyone who had come. As I mentioned, tents were erected on the school grounds along Ash Street. The town hall lawn had platform and seats for speeches. The Three Oaks Military Band and other musicians, some vocal, performed. Many interesting speeches were given on the second day. E.K. Warren, of course, made the welcoming address. J.L. McKee spoke on Three Oaks during the war, and William Chamberlain said not one Three Oaks soldier was killed in battle, although some did die in service. And then we saw the slide of the soldiers during the encampment. Okay, next slide. Joshua did get a pension. In 1891, he first applied for a pension and was turned down. In 1896, he received a pension for $6 a month. Supporting his application for a pension, though, was this letter which I found in the National Archives in his pension file. Right now, those pension files in the National Archives are being scanned and indexed by volunteers. Joshua's has not made it to the top of the pile yet, but as it said here, his commander wrote that Joshua Chatterson received an injury by falling down an embankment, that my attention was called to his mishap, and that I ordered him placed in an ambulance to be carried to Vicksburg. That I did at that time well know Joshua Chatterson, and in the years since have kept up acquaintance and correspondence with him. I am unable to state how long that injury detained him from duty, but I know it did for some time. Joshua Chatterson was a good and faithful duty soldier, as well as a brave one in battle. That for some years he's lived in Three Oaks and has frequently told me by letter of his ill health and asserted that he never fully recovered from the fall. I thought that was interesting because he seemed to do business fine for 20 years. But he did get his pension in 1896. It was $6 a month. I think this is slide 47. Yeah. And it increased to $8 a month in 1898 and to $10 a month in 1902. Okay. Back to his business life. In 1877, it says business was good. Chatterson and Friedel have raised the building in which their hardware store is kept and are fitting up a fine hall in the upper story. I think they meant they raised the roof. They are men of good business enterprise, and we rejoice in their prosperity. In 1990, Joshua Chatterson had a portion of his store building re-sided and put in an outside stairway built on the south side, leading up to the rooms which he is about to have fitted for his office.
He actually had two stores, one on each side of the
Right,
street.
this is
One,
the one on the west side of the street on the left, and the one on the right, we think is about 2 doors down from what was the dime store building. I'm pretty sure I've convinced Nick that that brick building is where the dime store and the antique store was. And the big white building is where the supermarket was when we were kids. And I think the Masonic Hall was up above it. These are pictures that Nick found of the Chatterson residence. The one on the left says this is the residence in winter, and the one on the right was referred to as the summer residence. I think it's the same house, but I'm not sure. I had a friend of mine who's an architectural historian, and she kind of sided with me. She thought the way the porch was built with the footings underneath it made it appear to be the same house. But we can't figure out why the trees, why that big tree is in the one picture and not in the other. But I'm guessing this is Joshua. I know this is Joshua standing on the front porch in the left-hand picture. And whether that's his first wife or his second wife, I'm not sure. The picture on the right is a current photo of a house at 112 Sycamore, and that may be the house. I believe it was sold recently, and if you Google that street address, you can see some wonderful pictures of the interior and exterior of the house, which has been added onto several times and has an indoor swimming pool. And here we are back at the house showing where the tree is. And I'm guessing that's one of his sons, either Freeman or Benjamin Chatterson. And whether that's his first wife died in 1896. So I'm not sure of which wife that is. But here is a kind of a cute little quote about him from the paper. Joshua Chatterson of Three Oaks is a jolly, sensible kind of a man. He enjoys life as well as any man we know of. He and his family have an annual camp out at the lake in Lakeside, and there is where they were last week. So Nick thinks maybe they had a similar house at the lake, but I didn't find articles of them going back and forth to the lake very often. So again, I don't know. Okay, here we are at the time. I'm sorry, I was wrong on the date. It was 1899 when Chatterson and Friedel dissolved their partnership. Friedel went on to open a mill, a grain mill. He had actually been operating the grain mill for a couple of years, but then he went totally into the grain business. And Joshua ran the firm for about a year on his own. And here is an article, an ad on the right hand side of this newspaper front page saying, "Here I am still. Come and buy the stove that suits you. Hardware and tinware, hardware store of Joshua Chatterson." And this was October of 1890. Oh, 1899, sorry.
Right. This is actually the newspaper from the day that President McKinley came to
Yeah, and
visit
that's
the village.
McKinley
So
down there, yeah.
he had a big display ad and the most read paper of the year, probably.
Well, then we had disaster. We had a fire in April of 1900. Chatterson's store. At 5:30 this morning, the factory whistle was immediately followed by the village one in a loud blast, and the cry of fire was taken up and repeated through the streets. Clouds of smoke were seen on Main Street, and soon it was noised that Joshua Chatterson's store was in flames. It appears the fire started in a rag bin in a room just back of the store proper, and the start is attributed to spontaneous combustion. At 6:15, the fire was turned off just 45 minutes after the whistle. A 7:30 view of Chatterson's building shows the rear practically demolished and a large part of the roof useless. The whole building is saturated with water. The property is quite fully covered by insurance. But and Joshua Chatterson sold the business to a man named Hamlin, who ran it as Hamlin Hardware. And here's an ad that Hamlin put in the paper having a fire damage sale, saying he was selling some of the things that had been damaged in that fire. Chatterson still owned the building. He just sold the business to Hamlin. And here's an accounting of the store being sold. It says Joshua Chatterson has been identified with Three Oaks Life in a business way for over 31 years, but now on account of ill health, feels he must give up at least the regular routine of his business. In making the transfer, the real estate has not been sold, but only the stock and goodwill. He has reserved space on the second floor, which will be fitted up as an office where he will conduct his real estate business. He also sold fire insurance out of that second floor in the Chatterson store building. And these are a couple of he had various properties in the village. And another thing I need to do is go through deeds in Berrien County and try and figure out which properties were which and who he bought them from and sold them to. But these are a couple examples. By March of 1903, Joshua was in poor health. I think he had a stroke. A sinking spill probably means he had a stroke. He improved from that point on for a while, but next slide, he passed away in January of 1904. And this is this was the first picture I ever found of him in his obituary. And this talks about his family. He Here's pictures of his tombstone. He and his wife lost 3 children within a few months of each other in 1880. One was a newborn baby, and the other two died of diphtheria, Lily and Joshua Jr. Another son, Arthur, lived to age 18. Um, Helen Tatro was a granddaughter of his. And Mrs. Elizabeth Spencer was Joshua's mother in law. They're all in the Chatterson family plot at Forest Lawn. Um, After his death, his widow tried to get a pension and was turned down originally, but there was an act. This was out of the U.S. congressional record, and she was eventually awarded a pension after his death. His survivors. As I said, he had several children, four who had died by that time. His survivors were his older son, Freeman Monroe Spencer, and this is a picture of Freeman's FM Chatterson Stationery and News Depot. I kind of think this is just to the north of where the Tottle Inn was. And that's a picture of Freeman Monroe Chatterson in later life. Freeman ran some businesses in Three Oaks, including a restaurant. He was married. He was divorced. His only child from that marriage died as a teenager. And he moved to Clinton, Iowa, where for some reason he took the last name of Kramer, Cramer, and was known as Freeman Monroe Kramer. He ran a Kodak business in Clinton, Iowa until his death. His second son was Benjamin Chatterson. Ben served in World War I in the cavalry. That's him in the top on the left-hand picture, and another photo of him to the right. He also moved to Clinton, Iowa. He had been married in Three Oaks, had two daughters, Luella and Lucille, and he moved to Clinton, Iowa, and had a second family. This is a picture of Joshua's daughter, Leno Chatterson Sheldon, my great grandmother, with her three children. That's Frank Sr. on the left, James Leonard, and Leela Mary. Leela died when she was about 9 years old of consumption. Leno's husband, James B. Sheldon, also died of consumption in the late 1890s, and I don't have a picture of him, but she raised those three children on her own. She did remarry for a while, but that husband took off, and there's another interesting story there. This is a picture of my dad, Frank Jr., and his dad, who was the town postman, Frank Sr. They're standing, I think, Carolyn, that's Aunt Siz's house across the street. That's the house at the corner of Oak and Locust facing Oak Street. And my grandmother's sister lived in that house.
That's my house.
Oh, you live there now. Hi, Randy.
Hi.
We've corresponded before.
Yeah,
So
we
that's
did.
an old picture of the house.
Yep.
Okay, here's a picture of the Sheldon family. That's my dad and mom. That's me on the left, my brother Steve, and my sister Julie. And that's in our house at 202 East Pawpaw Street. After my grandmother died in 1955, we continued to live in her house. And in 57, my parents bought the house at the corner of Pawpaw and Cedar, where I spent most of my growing up years. Okay, this is a picture of me with my family. That's my husband, Alan, my daughter-in-law and son, Joe, on the left, and my son, Ben, on the right. We were in Honolulu on Waikiki Beach, getting ready for dinner. And the final picture, it was taken 2 summers ago. You all recognize that picture if you've been to Three Oaks recently. That's the side of the old downtown Drugs is now a candy store. And that's the 7th generation descendants, my granddaughters, Charlotte and Juliet.
And may I point out, they may be standing on the property that was once the Chatterson.
It could very well be, yes. I wanted to share with you some of the resources that I use. These are some paid resources, my Heritage Library Edition, and I've listed some libraries where it's available. It's evidently available to many Michigan public libraries through the state library. Ancestry's Library Edition is available at the Lincoln Township Library in Stevensville, Niles, and the New Buffalo Library, and probably others around the state and country. I know my library in Virginia has that. American Ancestors is a good source for New England research, and many people in Three Oaks came from New England, so it can be helpful. The Niles Library has that accessible. Genealogy Bank, which I've used for my research, is another paid subscription. Fold 3 came out of the National Archives originally, and it has a lot of military records on it. Another source, the Berrien County Genealogical Society, stuck under paid resources. You can join for $15. And, they provide meetings and assistance in research. Okay, free resources. The Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne is a national treasure if you've never been there and are a serious genealogist. It has materials from all over the country. Find a Grave, which I know Linda Mangold uses a lot and adds to, is a free online database with cemetery records from all over the country. And if you're lucky, people add obituaries of people to these sites. There are often photos of people. They will list their parents, their children, so you can make connections and do family trees just by well-researched Find a Grave information.
That's where we found the photo of Joseph Friedel, the partner.
Okay,
Chatterson.
great. Chronicling America is on the Library of Congress website, and it's a listing of newspapers that have been scanned and microfilmed from all over the country. Again, it's worth looking at if you're doing research in places other than Berrien County. When I started doing research, I used to borrow the microfilm of the Three Oaks paper, and they would send it to my library from, I think, Western Michigan University. Then they stopped circulating it. And some guy in Fulton County, New York, decided to scan newspapers. And somehow or another, he scanned the Three Oaks newspaper. Unfortunately, his system of finding articles is, this was a one-man operation, and it's a very wonky system. You can't go from one page of the newspaper to the next. So when I discovered that Ancestry had added the Three Oaks newspaper, or rather newspapers.com had added the Three Oaks newspapers to their database, it's much, much easier to use.
That was last year. Yeah.
Yeah, I just happened on it one day and thought, oh my goodness, there it is. The LDS Church, the Mormon Church, has a database called Family Search that's also full of information. They have scanned vital records from all over the US and the world. There are a lot of German records in Ancestry. I found Italian records on Family Search, helped my cousin do some research. There are 2 family history centers at LDS libraries. My guess is if you want to check one of them out, go to the St. Joseph Family History Center on Niles Road. It's open Wednesday evenings and on Tuesday mornings by appointment, and there's a contact person there. I would call the Niles Library if you want to check out what they have at their church library. But most of the Mormon churches have libraries attached to them that are open to the public. And I think I was going to say, there's my email address. If you've got questions and want to contact me, it's just slevy3oaks@gmail.com. I wanted to add that there's still a lot more research to be done. I'd love to find more photos of the family. I want to discover when and where Joshua's mother died, why he came to Cass County, and I'd like to learn much more on the history of the GAR post. I'm not sure. Those records may be at Michigan State. They may be at Michigan. I'm not sure. But again, that's kind of the saga of my finding Joshua Chatterson. And I thank you all for coming and listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Again, you can see that Suzanne knows how to track down history. She's very good at it, and that's a pretty good three-dimensional portrait of this guy who
Well,
lived.
I couldn't have done it without Nick and all the great pictures that he found. It would have been pretty dry without all the great photos that the museum has collected.
Somebody has a question?
I do. Sarah Jakes.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Hi, Nick.
Ask away.
And hi, Suzanne. I have a question. It's a very minor question, but it's gnawing at me. The tombstone for Joshua Chatterson says that his wife is Mary Amelia, and she passed away at the very young age of 54.
Yeah.
But then the next slide was about the pension.
That was the second wife.
Okay, so I just didn't remember that you talked about the two families, and
Sorry about that. He married a woman who was probably in her 40s, maybe a year after his first wife died.
so did she help raise any of the
She
surviving
must,
children?
I'm not real clear on that. Maybe until Joshua died, but his oldest daughter, Leno, was in town, and I think she was married and had children of her own, and I don't know exactly who helped raise those boys. They both went to high school in Three Oaks. I have no idea what the relationship was between the stepmother. She had been married once before, and I think married two more times before she died. And I don't know a whole lot about her.
Yes, and I'm actually wrong that the first wife, Mary Amelia, passed at only 44, and I'm
Right.
thinking she's the one who, had all of those horrible
8
losses.
children, 3 had died.
And then another one died at 18.
Well,
think-
I did find out she had committed suicide.
Oh, the Mary
Amelia did.
Really? Was
Yeah,
that?
I found what they didn't put those things in the Three Oaks paper, but the
Yeah.
Berrien County Record, Charles Clute found an article in the Berrien County Record and sent it to me that said she had committed suicide. So they didn't print that in the local paper.
Oh,
I did find one article that she had been in a sanitarium in Lakeside a couple of weeks before she died. So she must have had some mental health issues.
yeah. Oh, that's
And,
tragic.
Yeah, and losing 3 babies in 4 months, I mean, that had to have taken a toll on her.
Sure. Well, thank you.
Sure. Thanks for asking.
One thing I found interesting, Suzanne, was in this age of political polarization, I thought that the relationship between Chatterson and E.K. Warren was interesting because they may have been on opposite sides of the saloon question. They ran against each other politically, but they were both involved in the Sunday school movement. They were involved in the Anti-Horse Thief Association. I think it was too small a town to burn your bridges, right?
I think that's true. I think that's true. I remember growing up, everybody was a Republican in Three Oaks, except I think Herb Nimps, who was it Herb Nimps who was the treasurer?
Yeah, I don't know.
And he always nobody cared that he was a Democrat. He just took that job and ran with it.
Right. Well, I mean, even back to the beginning of the village, Henry Chamberlain was a Democrat and his son-in-law E.K. was a Republican.
Yeah. Yeah.
They made their
And I don't think it mattered a whole lot.
Yeah. In any case, we are past 8 o'clock, so unless there's another question, I will wait a beat to see if there is. I think I'll thank everybody for attending. Our program next month is on the history of Lee's Theater. I'm going to put that together. And not only Lee's Theater, but sort of the history of cinema in Three Oaks.
Oh,
There were
great.
theaters both before and after Lee's, but the Lee's Theater was the theater from I don't know, the Lees began running it in the 1910s, and I think they sold maybe in the 70s or 80s. Can't remember exactly right now. I haven't put the whole program together, so I'm winging it here. But thank you all for attending. And
I have to apologize. Like I'm an hour out. I'm really sorry. I was thinking Indiana. Anyway, I'm really sorry.
well, yes, Yeah, sorry you missed most of the program, but yes, that pesky Central versus Eastern time. Anyway, thank you all for attending. Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Nick. Thank you
Thank you all for
both.
coming.
Suzanne,
I
thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you.